Well, good morning, everybody. As we start off here on this Tuesday morning, I think we're going to have to begin the forecast looking kind of half a world away. So here's my plan. I want to talk about how I think the tropics over the next several weeks are going to influence the pattern, I think more than the extra tropics. Although, as you know, there's one key area that I'm watching closely, and that would be the Bering Sea, the Chukchi Sea, Alaska, that region. I think that's going to be an important region for us to watch should there be any major risk of a cool down throughout the central part of the United States toward the Great Lakes. But I think our story today is going to start here. So what we're thinking about is where this particular typhoon is going to go. As I let this reset, it is south of Japan and it is quite strong right now. In fact, yesterday, if we got a good look at it from our NOAA satellites over there, we can see it had a really well-defined eye for the most part, quite symmetric storm. And the question was always about where this was going to go, how it was going to continue to develop. Could it be disruptive to the North Pacific jet stream? All of those questions, those are the ones we ask this time of year of West Pacific tropical systems because they can certainly influence our weather patterns here in North America. What was interesting is just to watch each model run try to predict where this thing is going to go. And if you notice, if I just play this out here for 7 days, the spread, which is kind of denoted here by this ellipse, is enormous. Some of the model runs have it going here, even into mainland China. Some have it running over parts of Japan and quickly getting into the North Pacific. And even this morning, I was looking at, I think, one of my favorite model runs, which was the GFS 6Z run. Watch the system right here on this forecast. Ready? They have it just spinning around, literally living here for several days on the southern tip of Japan, and then just finally running back to the south and then going straight toward the mainland China. That's over the next 2 weeks. Yesterday's model runs actually had it rolling around, hitting Japan 3 times before coming into China. It was amazing just to watch the models leave this system out to dry while it sits there and just spins all by itself, just following its warmest water. But as I paid attention to that, I did notice one thing. And as you watch me walk back and forth through this animation, I want you to note how often we see these lows kind of rolling out of parts of, northern China, Mongolia, and parts of Russia, Siberia, that just keep curling up into the Bering Sea. And why I'm so curious about this, so there's another one on Monday, September 2nd. Here's another one that's out there on Friday, September 6th, and yet another and another that keeps showing up here. Why I'm so curious about this is because if this continues to reinforce low pressure in this area, we're going to see the pattern kind of get on a repeat. It'll just be dominated by stuff either coming off of that region of Asia and the tropical influences here, and then our own tropical influences over in the Gulf of Mexico and in the Atlantic. And I just think that's what's going to help set the pattern into motion to look like this. So we talked a bit about this yesterday, but let's dig into it. We know that the models had been predicting that right here for much of this month of August into September, there was going to be high pressure. And I kept calling, I'm like, I don't know why that's going to be there. And sometimes I do get a forecast, right? And I got this one. And what's important about it is the more we keep low pressure into this area, the more we tend to get ridging along the west coast. Now, why that is important is because that will ultimately set the temperature and precipitation patterns for a lot of the United States, with the other main wild card being anything that comes out of the tropics, which again is going to be key in trying to figure this pattern out. Now, had this high pressure cell built into this region, I would have been talking about a deep trough of low pressure here more often than not, driving in cold air. It'd be a cold compared to average, end of August, beginning of September. But as it stands, this is really driving the jet stream pretty far to the north and only letting weaker waves roll through this area that sometimes build into the Great Lakes region. But the preference, when you look at a 15-day forecast, this is the next 15 days all smashed into one map, means we're more often not going to be seeing west coast ridging and a large ridge of high pressure that's going to live somewhere here. And if this pattern just gets stuck and stays in place, I think that's going to be critical. And I believe it's all starting right there with that trough, rolling over this ridge, redeveloping lows here. So just what I'm trying to piece together. Now, I'm going to be very clear with all of you. This whole pattern is fragile. One shift in the MJO, one shift in the North Pacific jet stream, one change from a typhoon that disrupts this high pressure cell, and it could all just collapse. But now you know what we need to be watching in order to determine if we're going to maintain lower pressure over parts of the Gulf of Alaska into Alaska and what that could do for the United States. So with all of that being said, the other wild card is our tropics. When I say our, I'm just referring to the fact that most of you are watching me in the United States, so we think about what's going to be coming out of the Atlantic. And the 7 o'clock this morning update, 7:26 a.m. updates showed on Eastern time here that the National Hurricane Center is now given a 20% chance of some development here over the next 7 days. So first time in a long time, we've been able to see the NHC graphic showing up with a little bit of activity. If we watch the high-res European model ensemble, we can see that as we build in here toward the 30th, 31st, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, that time frame, that we're starting to see more of the model ensemble members putting in low pressure. Again, this is not really getting going for another 4 or 5 days from now, maybe even beyond that. So it's, again, about a week beyond what we had initially thought. I thought right now we would already be seeing this kind of activity happening. But it's not just, kind of seeing where these tracks of low pressure are, but they're pretty consistent in their placement. So over the next 10 days, we've got just areas to be watching here. And given the position and strength of the Bermuda High, this could push more of its influence toward the eastern, coast of the United States. And I think I said this yesterday, I can't remember, but every system so far, because of the size and strength of that Bermuda High, has made landfall somewhere. Even Ernesto hit Bermuda, right? So we got to keep an eye on the potential for these tropical systems to work their way into the Gulf of Mexico or close to the east coast of the United States. We're still about, 15 plus days away from the peak of the hurricane season, and it's right now that the lid is finally starting to come off of this. So that lid I'm talking about is that the suppression, which you see here, is finally beginning to shift, and we're moving a bit more of the favorable environment toward that part of the Atlantic. So now we're able to tap better into a more moist profile. We're taking the upper level subsidence off, and we're starting to see the ocean temperatures able just to cook up storms, I think, a bit more easily when those waves roll off of Africa. Now, speaking of taking the lid off the atmosphere, yesterday, I don't know if you all watched this on radar, but I certainly did. On satellite, though, take a look at the size of the storm complex that blew up in Minnesota. At one point last night, the anvil from that storm complex that rolled out of Minnesota into Wisconsin was bigger than the state of Wisconsin itself. So if you took this and superimposed it over Wisconsin, it was a monster. And that was not to take away from the even, these massive storms, these other massive storms that were going through parts of Kansas and Nebraska, South Dakota, as the low curled itself up here. There was a report yesterday in Nebraska of 4-inch diameter hail out of this. And this storm did produce quite a bit of hail. We just got our newest image in this morning. And there's even some storms just north of Boone. I'm in Des Moines this morning, but just north of Boone, there was some lightning early this morning. And I know the Farm Progress show is getting going, so this is something to be on the lookout for. But if you look on the bigger picture here, and we flip this over to where it's showing you the visible satellite imagery, there's that anvil. Look at the size of that thing. And underneath it, we were producing quite a bit of severe weather. In addition to that, while much of this part of the country was dry, clear skied, a little bit of haze and smoke, we did see this weak upper level low we talked about a lot last week starting to move into Texas, bringing in some rain, but you're just going to follow these corridors curling around this low that produced most of our rainfall in the last 24 hours or so. But that hail, just wanted to show you this. In the last 24 hours, we can see here across parts of the Dakotas, really South Dakota coming out of Wyoming, getting into Nebraska. Again, the reports of over 4-inch diameter hail here from one of the storm chasers. And then you can see the size of the storm that rolled through parts of Minnesota into Wisconsin last night. Total rainfall just over the last 24 hours is shown here. And boy, that just clearly defines where the ridge is now, doesn't it? So not only were we able to pull some Gulf of Mexico moisture into this area around the ridge, but running its periphery, again, a low curling up here, we can just see where those storms passed. I think it's just a neat a neat visual of where this particular pattern is right now, keeping all that heat tucked away into this area. Okay, and talking about that heat, this is an animation once it restarts here of where we approached yesterday. It was very quick, but you saw it in there, where we approached record high temperatures, got within a few degrees or broke a record or maybe even broke a monthly record. It's extremely hot in this area. And we're continuing to watch that again today. This whole region mainly focused on Illinois, eastern Iowa, parts of southern Wisconsin, Indiana. That's where we have our excessive heat warnings, surrounded by heat advisories that even extend now into parts of Pennsylvania over to New Jersey and New York. These are all air quality alerts in some of these major metropolitan areas and then lining the coast. We have flood watches out for parts of New Mexico, and then red flag warnings still in parts of the Pacific Northwest, Idaho, Montana, and parts of Washington. The severe storm threat today moves over into parts of Wisconsin, clipping northern Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, big part of lower Michigan, and this does extend into this part of Ontario, although the maps made out of the SPC kind of cut off at the U.S. border here. Tomorrow, we're going to push that toward, the parts of the mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, with another chance for storms run around the backside of this here in the Dakotas, and this is how things are shaping up for the 29th. I am looking forward to the 29th. I'll be up at Loyola near Chicago, giving a talk to a group of Brazilian growers, and I'm very excited to be able to talk to them about what they're expecting out of their season, and I'll report back to you what I find. So that'll happen on the 29th here. But I'm a little disappointed this morning in the model initialization. This is what we had from Blitzertung, just looking at where there was some lightning strikes. Sorry, I'm just pushed myself up in my chair if you could hear that. What you can see here is that some of these storms that are pushing through this area were not well captured by the model, including, just so you can see this, just north of where the farm progress show is going to be, which is right in here. There it is. We've already got some lightning nearby, so we just need to be aware of that early this morning. But this is a terrible model initialization. I mean, I'm recording right about 7 a.m. I'm a little late this morning. I didn't get in until about 2 a.m. I just wanted to stay and watch my son play soccer, so I made that 5-hour drive late. But anyways, this is not where anything is this morning. So as I watch this, I'm like, okay, can I trust the model to be telling me where the rain's coming throughout the day today? I really can. We know that the risk is here, but I wouldn't look at this and put a lot of faith in exactly where these storm complexes are going to be going forward. It does show pretty well why we have that risk on Wednesday night here in the Dakotas as this next low, which was in the northwest, rolls into parts of Montana, southern Alberta and Saskatchewan. But I don't know that we necessarily can trust, I think, this particular model run on placement here of where this is coming through. But it is pretty clear that by the end of this week, by Thursday, there's going to be a pretty sizable front that rolls through this area, and that's what's going to knock these temperatures back, which I'll show you in just a few moments. So where do we stand on the the latest 1 week and 10-day forecasts? As you can see, we've once again seen the models trend wetter here with pulling more tropical moisture out of the Gulf of Mexico. We've seen the increased risk of storms in this area while a larger ridge tries to make things a bit drier up the west coast going forward. That's a 7-day forecast from the WPC. Here it is from the NBM. Very similar. If we go ahead and add on a few more days to the NBM, this is the 7 to 10, you can see some small shifts there. But as we know, the NBM, once we blend all the models out there beyond about 7 days, we don't often gain a lot of extra information from the model. So we look at individual runs from the artificial intelligence. There's the 7-day there, and I just noticed how wet it's got parts of Texas and Louisiana in this forecast, living right there along that moisture surge out of the Gulf of Mexico. And then we play it out there to the 10-day, and it's really increasing the rainfall across a lot of our Cottonbelt, just as an example. If we look at the GFS next, this is the 7 to 10-day, and I left the European for last. I usually leave the GFS for last, but if we look at the European model, that's the 7, and this is the 10-day, and it's really aggressively going after wetter conditions in the southern plains and in the southeast. It is drier after the storms roll through this part of the Midwest, but there seems to be an area that is being left out of this forecast when you're on the eastern side of the Rocky Mountains. And that region that I'm keeping a close eye on, I think you can see better if I show you a 10-day anomaly. And that's this part of the Ohio Valley, the Delta, and then following the rain that's coming through here, much of the Midwest. And we know the West is going to be drier in this pattern, largely because of the bigger ridge that's moving into that area. But I want to take a look more closely at these drier regions. So we're going to go to the probability of getting under a ½ inch of rain in the next 10 days. So the West, this is much expected with the size of the ridge that's going to be opening up in this area. But you'll note that parts of Missouri through southern Illinois, southern Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, there's a region in here in our mid-south and Midwest that has very low probability of getting some rain. Now over here, we do expect storms to roll through, so I'll be curious as to how much rainfall they do end up getting as this next storm system comes through. And you know that rain's coming into parts of Michigan, so I'm mostly curious about this spot, understanding that this was expected to go over drier. On the wetter side of this is the 10-day forecast for the probability of more than an inch. And a lot of our cotton belt's getting a big surge of moisture, and I don't see a hurricane doing any of this. This is all just moisture coming in and setting up for repeated days of thunderstorms across this area of our south. So that is kind of the mainstay of this pattern going forward. So to reinforce what I talked about at the beginning, let me take you back here. I'm going to use the artificial intelligence today. I use it a lot. I think it's doing a better job at finding some of the subtle features in the pattern. But here we go. This is getting out there toward this weekend on Sunday. There's the trough that sweeps through. That's the one that brings in the cooler air. But watch this ridge reopen in this area. So this is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And we continue to see that throughout much of next week, we get this low that's forming here. That's what we talked about at the beginning, a ridge that tries to open back up. And my main story here is if we keep putting low pressure in this area, it will allow more warmth to stay around longer in this area, rather than opening up a big ridge that rolls up the west coast all the way to Alaska, driving deep cold air into, well, for this time of year, into the upper Midwest and the Great Lakes, increasing the risk of frost. You know that I'm on the lookout for that. But the farther out I go, I just don't see something like that setting up. Now we're at the very tail end of a model run here, and there's some weird behavior going on in the North Pacific. Let's just watch that together. It's not necessarily a strong signal in the ensembles, but anytime we get a little bit of a blocking signal that we call a high over low or a Rex block in the North Pacific, it could signal what I'm worried about, which would be doing this ridge coming up the west, and we get more colder air coming into this area. But just remember, I'm putting a giant question mark on this because this is brand new, just showing up now in the models, and I'm not overly concerned about it just yet. But given all of that, I think what we need to watch is the placement of the western U.S. ridging. So here's the trough that's there now. Okay, you just saw the low coming into Montana. Okay, we see that the ridge builds behind it. And the longer we keep this, above this line, the more we're just going to spread more of the warmth out of the west into the plains and at times into the Midwest. If it gets really high, in other words, if this just comes out of the basement, comes way up here, then I get really worried about Great Lakes and surrounding states and provinces. I get worried about a frost event. So that's just to be clear on what I'm watching here. But as it stands, week 2 continues to look the same. This is the European model, week 2 forecast. It looked just like this yesterday, wettest across our south, and the GFS is right in line with it. So once we get out of this active time period early this week, much of the activity through a huge section of North America is just going to kind of turn off a bit. It's just going to slow down. The pattern's not sending waves through that area that are of much significance according to the models right now. And it just gets a little bit of a drier signal. That's what we're seeing while we stay wet across the south. So from here, let's flip over and talk about temps. Just want to give you the latest 7-day forecast on frost. Most of this is at very high elevation, of course. Here's today's max temperatures. Let's blow that up once, so you can see why we have the excessive heat warnings in this area, but there's a cool down coming right here temporarily. So there's into Wednesday and Thursday. Look at the warmth coming back to the west coast. The drop in temperatures behind that front I mentioned. Watch it come right through the Midwest for Friday into Saturday. So knocking these temperatures way back off. There's our broader western ridging showing up. All the heat stays in the southeast. And there it is Sunday into Monday, the cool down really extending during that time frame. So the day 5 through 10 didn't show much change. And here's the day 10 through 15. And again, just note that while the low stays here, we're not going to get the heat in Alaska. So there's going to be broader open ridging keeping warmth around. This is all cloud cover, keeping things cooler with the wetter conditions. If you start seeing these maps showing up with a lot of heat in Alaska, then the signal is there for the risk of a major cool down. So just to be on repeat with that message, that's what I want you to hear. All right, just to double check on the European model, this is day 5 through 10, and then day 10 through 15, pretty consistent with what the GFS was showing. So there's the cool down we're expecting across a broad section of the country following, the heat that's there now, and then it warms back up. Now, the longer range European model, I think, has a better handle. Notice how now it's putting higher pressure here, keeping lower pressure in this area. And I think because of that, if we kind of zip into the United States, let's look at let's get to the U.S. first. Look at a 30-day precipitation anomaly. Through the month of September, this will likely favor drier conditions overall. Okay, so that's just what happens when that pattern develops a broad ridge that just opens up and doesn't feature a lot of short waves. Now, I didn't say dry, I said drier, but we'll need to keep an eye on what this could mean going forward. The tropics are the big wild card. On the temperature side of this, the European model is still just very, very mild. It's not picking up on the week-to-week variability, which there will be some, but it's overall predicting a mild month of September, and so is the CFSV2. If we just take a look at the week 3, week 4 temperature pattern, this is what we've got overall. A lot of warmth the 10th through the 16th, still near normal through the middle and end of the month in the Midwest, while there's a lot of heat in the western United States. What I'm, concerned about is we just looked at the Mississippi River, and it is about 1.5 feet below low stage at Memphis. If we do get into a drier pattern, as both models are calling for mid-September here and here, the big wild card will be if that could be busted up by a big tropical system. And that we're not going to be able to forecast weeks in advance. It's just going to be watching it and a 10-day step every single video. So the last thing I want to get into in today's video is going to be about soil moisture in Brazil. So this is going to become a mainstay of our conversations going forward. And I thought I'd just show you a year ago what the map looked like. Root zone soil moisture back on August 21st of 2023. Remember, Argentina was coming out of a 2-year drought, but we had some heavier rains from Bolivia to Paraguay to southern Brazil, and even central Brazil wasn't overly dry a year ago. Well, here's the newest map. Okay, sorry, it's a little different view there, but it's the newest map on August 19th. And it just again reflects how dry the dry season was. And the reality is that according to satellite-based measurements, a lot of Argentina is dry, while it's very southern Brazil. This is Rio Grande do Sul that's been wet, even into a little bit into Uruguay. Over the next 10 days, this is a precipitation anomaly map. We're expecting no rain in this area, and the model's backed off significantly on the rain in southern Brazil and have tucked it right here, basically from Buenos Aires over toward Cordoba, where there's a chance we're getting some moisture into this area. But the longer range European continues to do what I showed you yesterday. The next 30 days is drier, but it's trying to wake up the monsoon once we get out to the end of September and the beginning of October, and the time period starting on September 11th going to October 11th, especially the second half of that 30-day time period, the European model is returning monsoonal flow. Now, it's not there yet, but once it starts to establish and develop itself, we need to have a conversation about it for what it could mean for the planting. Do I think the model is 100% right? No. I don't know that we've properly accounted for the MJO movement, the fact that we've got strong trades that are moving throughout parts of the Atlantic, where the Atlantic meridional mode is right now. There's a lot of things going on, but the model's designed to capture that, at least we hope it is, that it can do that, We know it's designed to do that. So we just need to ask if this is really going to come into fruition and keep a close eye on it, because that'll be critical as they go into their spring planting. Okay, I will talk to you again tomorrow morning. You all have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you soon. Thanks.